When I was just 9 years old, I remember coming home from school one afternoon and walking into the kitchen to see my mom and my grandfather sitting at the table. They'd been waiting for me, probably hoping I wouldn't notice the worried look on their faces. That day, they had some bad news. They told me my dad was missing. Turns out, he and my Uncle Jake had gone on a weekend hunting trip, heading into the woods about half a mile east of our town, Keta. Dad realized he'd left his grunt call in his truck, which is basically just a kind of duck whistle that sounds like a buck's grunt, and he decided to head back to retrieve it. He told Uncle Jake to wait where he was, but he never came back. Uncle Jake said he waited around 20 to 30 minutes, getting more anxious by the minute, and then he decided to go back to the truck. But when he got there, Dad was nowhere in sight. That night, a search party of deputies from McDowell County scoured the hills, combing every inch near Keta for his whereabouts. The effort continued for about 2 weeks. Every possible lead was checked. Every trail looked intoyed. There wasn't a single sign of Dad. Eventually, the sheriff's office called off the search, but my mother kept him listed as a missing person for quite a while. In the meantime, my family pooled together some money to hire a private investigator, a retired cop from Charleston, someone who knew his way around criminal cases and tracking missing persons. Sadly, after some time and effort, he could only deliver one conclusion to my grandpa and mom. The most likely explanation was that Dad had wandered into the woods, perhaps near some old mining pits close to a town called Cucumber. According to their theory, he might have fallen down one of those shafts and ended up at the bottom, where his body stayed all these years. During the initial search, a team of caving specialists carefully mapped out all the shafts that were safe to explore. Teams of dog handlers were dispatched to look through the tunnels that weren't safe to enter, but no trace of Dad was ever found in any of these places. Now, that doesn't rule out the possibility that his body's still down there, hidden in the darkness, but the sheriff couldn't say for sure. What's more, my mom later learned from the PI they hired that there was some graffiti inside one of those mine shafts, strange symbols or words, crudely spray-painted across a wall somewhere midway down. The PI didn't recognize what it said, only that it was scratched in about then, probably by local kids hanging out in the tunnels as a hangout spot. That detail made him think the kids who tagged the place might have known something about my dad's disappearance, but despite their efforts, they couldn't track down any of those teenagers. Uncle Jake tried to help as much as he could, staying in close contact with the PI, but he took Dad's disappearance hard. That pain cut deep. Everyone kept reassuring him it wasn't his fault. He hadn't known what was going on, and he'd done everything right. Still, after Dad vanished, Uncle Jake never quite recovered, was never himself quite the same. I didn't understand the full story until I was much older, but between the day Dad went missing and the day my mom had him declared legally dead, there was a crushing mix of hope and heartbreak. My sister and I would ask, "When is Daddy coming home?" And sometimes it almost drove Mom crazy with grief. As we grew and accepted that he wasn't coming back, it got easier to deal with, until eventually it faded into the background. But it was always there, just beneath the surface. By the time I turned 22, my sister was in college over in Morgantown, and I was working full-time at a repair shop in Welsh. I hadn't seen Uncle Jake in over 4 or 5 years. He'd send us birthday and holiday cards and call Mom around the anniversary of Dad's disappearance, but he kept himself pretty distant otherwise. That is, until one day Mom told me he called and asked to speak with me directly. I was more than happy to finally see him again after all this time. I understood why he'd kept his distance. Once told my mom that I reminded him of a younger version of Dad. That brought him some joy but also a lot of pain. Because of that, I figured I wouldn't be seeing much of Uncle Jake anymore, and honestly, that made me kind of sad too. But then, when I finally met him, I realized he looked better than I expected, more clear-eyed, on his feet, the kind of guy who still believed in the good in people. We spent the day catching up. I brought some cold cuts, sandwiches, and cold beers, and we sat and talked across the porch. As the hours went on, the subject of Dad came up naturally, how much we missed him, until Uncle Jake suddenly blurted out a proposal. He asked if I wanted to visit the last place where Dad was seen, the site where he disappeared. Said it might give me some closure. He'd been up in those hills east of Quetta about 6 times, but had never found anything concrete, just the feeling of being useless, out in those woods looking for a trace of Dad that was never there. At first, I didn't think it was a good idea. Walking around where my father vanished sounded like some kind of slow torture. But I was happy just to reconnect with Uncle Jake again. I could build a real relationship with only other man in the family who ever really knew Dad. I was wary at first, but as the months went by, I started to see that walking those woods might help me find some kind of peace. I began visiting Uncle Jake every couple of weeks, and after finally agreeing to drive up into those hills with him in early May, I felt a small sense of anticipation. We'd treat it like a normal hike, bring some beers, some snacks, and if I felt like talking about Dad or asking questions, we'd cross that bridge when we got there. I remember feeling kind of nervous as we headed down that dirt road near the creek to where we'd parked my truck, but once we started walking and talking, I realized that area was just another stretch of West Virginia woods, nothing more than dense trees, moss, and shadows, just like any other. Still, I sensed there was something different in that place, some ghost of my father lingering there. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was out there, not just a memory, but something real. Maybe call it hope, maybe call it memory, whatever it was, I could feel it. We kept walking along, crossing over Big Creek and resting on a flat rock at the water's edge, which I guessed was about the halfway point of our hike. When we finished, I suggested we head back to the truck, but Uncle Jake had other plans. He told me there was one more spot he wanted to show me, so we continued for another mile or so, until we came to a jagged outcrop overlooking the old mines I'd told him about earlier. I asked if that was the place the private investigator had checked years ago, and Uncle Jake nodded. Then he sighed and looked at me with a seriousness I'd never seen before. Said there was something he needed to tell me, something he'd told the sheriff and the pie, but never dared tell me or Mom. The last time he saw Dad was when he was walking into one of those mines, right where we stood. Said he'd run all over those woods calling Dad's name, trying to find him before things got worse. He wasn't much of a tracker, but he just got lucky that day he saw a figure, a short distance away, dressed exactly like Dad, walking straight into a dark tunnel. Before he could even react, Uncle Jake said he scrambled down the slope and ran after him, flashlight in hand. But when he reached the entrance, the place was empty, no sign of Dad, no body, no footprints, just silence. I asked if he'd seen the same graffiti in the shaft that the pie mentioned, and he shook his head. Said what truly haunted him was how that old mine made him feel an intense, uneasy sense of dread. He never thought Dad was walking into the mines voluntarily, but the thing that haunted him most was the image of Dad walking into that darkness, and then calling out his name, only to vanish. Uncle Jake believed that something terrible had happened in there, something that made Dad unable to speak or walk afterward. I understood why he hadn't told me everything at first. It was dark enough already, no need to add more mystery and horror. I told him I appreciated his honesty, even if it was disturbing, and really, once I heard that story, I didn't want to push my luck. We agreed it was probably best to leave. But Uncle Jake wasn't finished. He asked if I wanted to go down into the mine with him, said he did that kind of walk every now and then, just to stay in touch with that place. I thought about it. We'd come all that way, and I figured that if it might give me some answer, sir, even just a feeling of making peace, I should go. We carefully traced the steep edge of the outcrop down into the mine. The warning signs out front made it clear. Don't go in, dangerous, deadly. I asked Uncle Jake if he thought Dad had fallen down that shaft or been caught in a collapse, but he only shook his head. Said if that was the case, Dad's body would have been found long ago. As we drew closer, I felt the air get colder, the darkness pressing in. There were broken beams like jagged teeth, the shadows deep and unwelcoming. We didn't speak much, they didn't have to. The place was deathly silent except for the crunching gravel beneath our feet. I saw discarded tools, a cracked lantern, some frayed rope, signs that this place had been abandoned in a rush, not left to decay gradually. I asked Uncle Jake why the mine was shut down, and he told me rumors of flooding, but he didn't know for sure. The official story was that the mining company went bankrupt, but if that's true, then why was everything left behind so hastily? As we approached the entrance, a jagged scar in the rock, the atmosphere grew heavy, more oppressive. The light from outside was barely penetrating, and I saw broken wooden supports sticking out at odd angles, like the broken teeth of some monstrous beast. We hesitated, knowing how dangerous it was, but I told Uncle Jake I wanted to go inside, no matter what. He warned me I didn't have to, that it was dangerous, but I refused to turn back now. Slowly, I pushed open the gate and the darkness swallowed us. My tiny flashlight barely cut through the gloom. Dust, mold, metal, everything smelled like decay, and I could feel the weight of that oppressive silence. Inside, I saw the usual signs of a hurried abandonment: tools tossed aside, the tunnel stretching into darkness, and strange markings smeared on the walls. The graffiti I expected, but not the writing. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. It looked like symbols, strange characters smeared in black paint, covering a whole section of the tunnel walls. I didn't have time to make sense of it. I was there to find a hiding spot, not decipher ancient scripts. I slipped into one of the side chambers, crouching in the shadows, heart pounding so loud I worried it could give me away. I did my best to stay quiet, but even then, I knew I wasn't alone. For the first few minutes, and it felt like hours, I stayed perfectly still, ears ringing with the echoes of gunshots and Uncle Jake's footsteps. Every nerve was heightened, every sound amplified. I was sure I was completely surrounded, trapped. My mind raced. What if he found me? I stayed as still as I could, trying to calm my racing heart while keeping my breathing shallow. I had to stay silent and still, no matter how much I wanted to run. Then I heard the faint sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer. I held my breath, praying. I remembered whispering to myself in my head, "Don't come down here. Please, God, just don't let him find me." And somehow, miraculously, didn't. Instead, I heard his voice calling my name, but it wasn't Uncle Jake. It was Stanley, the name of my dad. That's the moment I knew I was truly in deep trouble. Uncle Jake must have lost his mind, or something dark possessed him. No other explanation. That's when I saw him standing about 20 feet away at the edge of the tunnel, holding something. It was a gun. I saw him trembling, his hand shaking uncontrollably. Part of me wanted to reason with him, to believe that maybe he'd meant to scare me, that he'd brought the gun for protection. But the way he held it, the silence, the trembling, something was seriously wrong. My stomach sank like a stone. I ran. I bolted down the tunnel, my tiny flashlight flickering as I sprinted with every ounce of strength I had. The first shots rang out behind me, cracks echoing in the claustrophobic space. I felt the bullet zip past my side so close I could hear the whiz, and the shock of it made me turn my flashlight off to escape detection. Darkness swallowed everything. I was terrified. I'd never felt fear like that in my life. My lungs burned, my muscles ached. Only thing guiding me was my desperate hope to escape. Suddenly, I saw that the tunnel was splitting into 3 different directions. I hit the first one instinctively, sprinting blindly into it. I realized the walls were lined with strange symbols, smeared and glowing faintly, symbols I'd never seen before. It was like some ancient language, alien and incomprehensible, painted in that black ink. I kept running, searching for a hiding spot, stumbled into a smaller chamber branching off from the main tunnel, and hurried inside. I curled up into the corner, trying to stay still, chest heaving, heart pounding. My ears remained hypersensitive to every sound: the faint scrape of gravel, a whisper of movement. I concealed myself, but the terror refused to fade. I was trapped. The silence was deafening, and I listened desperately for footsteps or voices, but all I could hear was the faint echo of gunfire and the pounding of my own heartbeat. I remembered how I'd tried to stay as quiet as possible, but still, every second felt like an eternity. Suddenly, I heard Uncle Jake's voice, distant but unmistakable, calling my name, the sound of footsteps approaching. I froze as he drew nearer, the hope that I might escape flickering just a little. But then, everything changed. His footsteps stopped, and there was a long, eerie silence. I could almost feel him turning around, maybe saw his flashlight beam sweep past the chamber where I hid. Then he said in a cracked, raspy voice, "I know you're here, Stanley. I brought him. I did what you asked." Those words echoed in my mind, chilling me to the bone because they weren't my Uncle Jake's words. No, they were my dad's, named Stanley. I was terrified beyond belief. Uncle Jake had lost his mind, surely that was it. Or perhaps something else was at play, something malevolent controlling him. I wanted to scream, to shout, and I thought about rushing him. But I knew that if I moved, I'd reveal my position. So I stayed perfectly still, praying he wouldn't see me. Minutes dragged on, each one feeling heavier than the last. I listened as his footsteps grew closer again, heavier, more deliberate. I held my breath, desperately praying he wouldn't find me. Then I heard him shout that he'd found me, that he'd done what was asked, and I knew I couldn't wait anymore. I bolted out of my hiding place, running full tilt, hearing his wild, frantic screams echo behind me, loud, terrifying and prolonged, like they'd come from hell itself. I didn't look back. I just ran out of the tunnel into the daylight, limbs aching, lungs heaving. Somehow I made it through the woods, my legs screaming in protest, and I stumbled out onto the familiar slope where we'd climbed down into that mine. I scrambled up the incline, clutching my chest, and kept running until my legs gave out. The woods were unnervingly silent, but Uncle Jake's screams kept echoing in my mind, haunting every step. I was overwhelmed, shocked, exhausted, but strangely triumphant. I had survived. I made it out. But I didn't feel victorious. Instead, all I felt was numb resignation. I slowly walked back to my truck, me hands trembling as I watched for the glint of its metal bed through the trees. When I finally saw it, I reached out, trembling, opened the door, and fell into the driver's seat. I just sat there for a long moment, staring at the windshield, unable to process everything that had happened. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel happiness. All I could feel was emptiness, like I'd been drained of any emotion. I had to drive home, but I knew I couldn't do it safely. I could barely hold the wheel. So I stopped at the first motel I found, asked the girl at the front desk if I could use their phone, and made the call to the sheriff's department. My hands shook as I explained everything about Uncle Jake attacking me, the hellish mine, the strange symbols, and the voice I'd heard. I told them I believed he'd suffered some sort of accident or gas poisoning inside that old mine and was still trapped somewhere inside. Within 15 minutes, 2 deputies arrived at the motel, and I recounted the story. Agatha took notes and promised to investigate. I spent the night trying to make sense of what had happened, but the thoughts kept echoing in my mind. Hours later, one of the deputies called me back. They'd found footprints and shell casings, but no sign of Uncle Jake himself. No body, no blood, only the shells near the mine's entrance, where he'd fired at me before I ran. What they concluded was that Uncle Jake probably suffered some kind of gas blowout inside the minia, sudden release of toxic gases like methane or carbon monoxide that disoriented him and caused him to attack. The sheriff explained that such gas explosions could produce what they called tsunamis of noxious vapor, deadly, uncontrollable. They believed Uncle Jake had inhaled this mix, which caused him to see things, act violently, and ultimately become the suspect in my father's disappearance. They said he'd likely been overwhelmed and lost control of his mind in the chaos, which explained why he tried to hurt me. They also pointed out that Uncle Jake's bank account had been inactive since he vanished. That, coupled with the fact that he'd left no trace, made them think he'd intentionally disappeared, or perhaps was harmed beyond recognition. I still remember how the sheriff told us that in all likelihood Uncle Jake was caught in a gas blowout, and that's what had made him act so violently. The official report suggested that he might have been incapacitated by the gases, and perhaps died in that mine, or been driven mad from the experience. But here's what I believe the sheriff's conclusion about some kind of gas explosion. I think it's wrong. I told them at the time, and I've believed ever since, that it wasn't just gas that made Uncle Jake shoot at me in that mine. It was something darker, something else altogether. I told the sheriff repeatedly that I felt that the strange rush of warm air I experienced as I was hiding was real, happened right before Uncle Jake started calling my dad's name, not during our walk in the woods. Yet they dismissed it, saying I was disoriented or scared, that maybe it was just adrenaline or panic, that I didn't really know what I'd felt. But I do know. I know what I saw and I know what I experienced. Uncle Jake knew too. He wasn't just confused. What happened in that mine was something much worse, and I'm not ready to speak the full truth about it. It's like opening a door to something terribly, and I'm just not prepared for what might be waiting on the other side. There's something down there inside those old shafts, something far better left undisturbed. My name's Myra, and I'm a researcher at UNCC, studying cultural practices and social identities through ethnography and history. I've worked on plenty of projects, but one, in particular, I wish I could forget, and that's not because of who I dealt with or what I learned, but because of a singular encounter with a woman I came across during my research. Her story, tied to the history of the Mungan people, their tradition, resilience, and historized me into something deeply unsettling. The Mungan are a mixed-race community living where Tennessee, Virginia, and North Carolina meet. They're believed to have roots blending European, African, and Native American ancestry, possibly dating back to the late 1700s or early era. The name Mungan comes from the French word for mixture. They lived in relative isolation, places like Hawkins and Hancock counties in Tennessee, Lee County in Virginia, and parts of western North Carolina. The origins of the Mungan are fiercely debated. Some say shipwrecked Portuguese sailors, others say remnants of the lost colony, or unions between free people of color, settlers, and native tribes like the Cherokee or Saponi. Genetic studies suggest many have African and European ancestry, with traits like dark hair, light eyes, and a distinctive bump on the head, what some call the Mungan bump, though appearances can vary widely. Over time, many Mungan descendants have assimilated into broader society, but groups like the Mungan Heritage Association keep their history alive, celebrating a complex identity that defies racial categories. Studying them was supposed to be a fortunate opportunity, something rare in anthropology. No long flights or awkward travel guides needed. I was thrilled when my proposal was accepted, but if I'd known what I was walking into, there's no way I'd have gone through with it. I remember driving down a winding Appalachian road in my old car, rattling over gravel, questioning whether my trusty old sedan was going to make it all the way. The trail led me to a tiny village called Hollow Ridge. Some say it's even on no maps, where locals claim that some folks there age strangely, or not at all, living far longer than most. After hours of chasing dead ends, I finally saw Hollow Ridge emerge through the trees. Old clapboard houses sagging on the hillside, smoke curling from chimneys. I parked near a general store, grabbed my bag, and stepped outside to breathe in the crisp, damp air smells of pine and earth. A man in overalls nodded at me from across the street, and I nodded back. Inside the store, the clerk, an older, wiry guy with graying hair, eyed me skeptically as I asked about the village. I told him I was a genealogist researching Mungan bloodlines. He frowned, gave me a wary look, then pointed up the ridge and warned, "Folks up there don't take kindly to outsiders. Better watch yourself." I bought a soda and some gum and set out up the steep wooded path that cut through the trees. Leaves and twigs muffled my steps as I climbed, the terrain tough, and after about a mile, I reached a small cluster of older, smaller houses. A woman sat on her porch shelling peas. When she looked up, her eyes were dark, steady, and unwelcoming. I introduced myself, saying I was researching family histories, but she only gestured toward the house behind her, saying her mother was inside. I stepped onto the porch, knocked, but the door creaked open before I could say a word. Two tall men with weathered faces and white hair appeared, looking as if they might be brothers. They didn't invite me in or ask what I wanted. I explained why I was there, keeping it simple. One of the men, a little shorter, with a scar across his cheek, said his mother was 112 and didn't talk much, so I shouldn't tire her out. The other nodded to me and motioned inside. The house smelled of mildew and wood smoke. Inside, in a dim room lit by a single bulb, lay an extremely thin woman, more skeleton than flesh. Her skin stretched tight over her bones. Her eyes sunken deep, giving her a ghostly look. Her hair hung in thin white strands and her hands rested like claws. Her breathing sounded raspier than sandpaper. I sat on a stool the sun pulled over. She showed no reaction, no glance, no words. I gently asked her name. Nothing. Her son stayed nearby, arms crossed, watching. I then asked where her people came from, but she remained silent, staring into the distance. I asked about her childhood, her parents, but got no answers. After a while, one of her sons whispered, "Don't push her now." I nodded, understanding, but my curiosity burned. The woman was 112 years old and looked like she'd starved for decades. I had to know more. So I leaned forward, voice soft, and asked, "Ma'am, how long have you lived? What's your secret for living so long?" Her eyes snapped open. She looked at me wide-eyed, a strange fear on her face, and then in a raspy, barely audible voice she whispered, "It eats the years." Her expression was so terrified that it looked like she was speaking her own death sentence. The effort to speak visibly drained her. When she finished, her eyes rolled back, her body jerked, and she gasped desperately for air. Her sons rushed to Heron, shouting for me to get out, the other tending to her. I scrambled outside, heart pounding, as the door slammed behind me. Her words echoed in my mind. It eats the years. I wanted to go back, wanted to demand answers, but I knew better. That placid village had vanished as if erased. The woman, Ona, was gone, her basket abandoned. I stood there, silent, listening as her son's frantic voice called after me. "Don't come back." I kept walking down the trail, trying to shake off the image of her twisted face and those haunting words. Back in my car, I sat trembling, scribbling every detail I could remember. The village felt different, no quieter, heavier. I kept checking my rearview mirror more often than I should, just in case. That night, I sat in my apartment, haunted by Ona's face and her words. I kept replaying her saying, "It eats the years," over and over in my head, trying to understand. Sleep was impossible. I had a vivid nightmare where I was lying in that same old bed, my face gaunt and ancient, whispering those words to a terrified researcher. The next day, I called my old friend Mark, a folklorist specializing in Appalachian legends. I told him about Ona, the village, and what she'd said. There was silence on the line before he finally spoke. He told me he'd heard stories, rumors, really about a place called Hungry Hollow, a village that matched Hollow Ridge. He'd never been able to verify them because the stories lacked details, just old tales of curses and pact-making with the land. He mentioned that such a discovery might turn into a huge source of pride for me. I thanked him, but inside I was even more unsettled. I couldn't stop thinking about Ona, about what I'd seen and heard. A week later, I drove back out to Hollow Ridge again, parked my car, and started down the same trail. But when I reached where Ona's house had been, nothing was there. The houses were empty, silent, no one on the porches. I approached her home and knocked, but no answer. The door was unlocked, so I pushed it open. Inside, it was empty, no furniture, no sign of Ona or her family. I called out, but only silence responded. It felt like everyone had disappeared. Weeks passed, but I couldn't bring myself to focus on my research anymore. The question haunted me. What did Ona mean, "it eats the years"? Could it be a metaphor, a curse, or something darker? I dug through my books and the university archives, checking folklore, native history, town records. Nothing concrete. Until one night, I found a 1700s journal entry from a fur trapper's account. He called the place Hungry Hollow, warned of its unnatural atmosphere and a dangerous reputation, something better left alone. That name matched Hollow Ridge, but no other details, no explanations, just meager old stories. I wanted to believe that the experience was just my imagination, that there was some logical explanation. But I knew better. I'd seen genuine fear in Ona's eyes, something real and terrifying. I wasn't eager to go back there ever. That place is dangerous. I think about it often and wonder what's really lurking beneath those ancient hills. But I have my doubts I'll ever find out. And honestly, I hope I never do. Because some evils, I've come to believe, don't die, just wait in the shadows, ready for their next victim.